Good morning, you're listening to the brief wake up, your mindful start to the day. I'm Handel, your daily coffee companion, helping you wake up informed, thoughtful, and maybe just a little amused before the day gets old. If you're commuting, corralling kids, or just standing in line for caffeine, you're in the right place. Let's get you caught up. Today in health, let's talk about snoring, something many people treat as a harmless annoyance, but which can sometimes carry important medical information. Snoring happens when air moves through a partially narrowed upper airway during sleep. As the air passes through, the soft tissues in the throat, including the soft palate, uvula, and sometimes the base of the tongue, begin to vibrate. That vibration is what produces the sound we recognize as snoring. In many people, snoring is simply the result of relaxed throat muscles during sleep. Alcohol before bedtime, sleeping on your back, nasal congestion, or simply anatomical features like a narrow airway can all contribute. And in those situations, snoring may not represent a serious health problem. But sometimes snoring can be a sign of something more significant: obstructive sleep apnea. Sleep apnea occurs when the airway collapses repeatedly during sleep, temporarily blocking airflow. These episodes can last 10 seconds or longer and may happen dozens, sometimes even hundreds of times per night. When that happens, oxygen levels drop and the brain briefly wakes the body up just enough to reopen the airway. Most people don't remember these awakenings, but they fragment sleep throughout the night. The result can be daytime fatigue, morning headaches, difficulty concentrating, and sometimes high blood pressure. Over time, untreated sleep apnea has been linked to increased risks of cardiovascular disease, stroke, and metabolic problems. So how do you know when snoring might be a red flag? There are several clues. Loud, chronic snoring, combined with witnessed pauses in breathing, gasping during sleep, excessive daytime sleepiness, or waking unrefreshed may suggest sleep apnea rather than simple snoring. Risk factors include obesity, a large neck circumference, certain jaw or airway anatomies, alcohol before sleep, and nasal obstruction. But it's important to remember, not everyone who snores has sleep apnea. Many people snore occasionally with no underlying disorder at all. The key distinction is whether breathing repeatedly stops during sleep and whether the person is experiencing symptoms of poor sleep quality. If sleep apnea is suspected, the diagnosis is usually made with a sleep study, either in a laboratory or sometimes through a home monitoring test. And the good news is that treatments exist: weight loss, positional therapy, oral appliances that reposition the jaw, and CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure, can all significantly improve breathing and sleep quality. So the takeaway is simple: snoring can be harmless, but persistent, loud snoring combined with daytime symptoms may be a signal that the airway is collapsing during sleep. And that's something worth paying attention to, because better breathing at night often means better health during the day. The news is next. In the news, last night Hollywood held its biggest night of the year, the 98th edition of the Academy Awards in Los Angeles. The night's biggest winner was One Battle After Another, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. The film took home Best Picture and several other major honors, while Anderson himself won Best Director and Best Adapted Screenplay. For a filmmaker long considered one of the most respected directors of his generation, it marked his first Oscar wins. In the acting categories, Michael B. Jordan won Best Actor for his performance in Sinners, a film that also picked up awards for original screenplay, cinematography, and original score. Best Actress went to Jessie Buckley for her performance in Hamnet. making her the first Irish actress to win the category. The supporting awards went to Sean Penn for his role in One Battle After Another, and Amy Madigan for her performance in Weapons. There were also a few historic milestones during the ceremony. Cinematographer Autumn Durald Arkapaw became the first woman ever to win the Oscar for cinematography, and Norway earned its first Best International Feature Film win with Sentimental Value. The ceremony itself was hosted by Conan O'Brien, who brought a lighter tone to the evening while also acknowledging how much the film industry is changing. Because the reality is that the Oscars today are not just about Hollywood anymore. They're about a global film industry where international films, streaming platforms, and worldwide audiences are shaping what movies get made and what stories resonate. And if last night showed anything, it's that the center of cinema may still be Los Angeles, but the audience for it now spans the entire world. The Big Sip is next. For the Big Sip, let's continue with our IQ series and talk about some of the biggest myths surrounding IQ. Because once intelligence testing entered popular culture, the science and the mythology began to blur together. One of the most common beliefs is that a very high IQ guarantees success in life. But the research doesn't support that. Higher IQ is associated with certain advantages, especially in academic settings and complex professions. But it's far from deterministic. Once someone reaches a level of cognitive ability sufficient to handle the demands of a field, other traits begin to matter just as much, and often more. Things like discipline, persistence, emotional stability, the ability to work with other people. In fact, psychologists often find that personality traits such as conscientiousness, the tendency to be organized, reliable, and persistent, can rival or even exceed IQ as predictors of long-term achievement. In other words, the person who consistently shows up prepared and does the work often outperforms the person who is exceptionally bright but inconsistent. A second myth runs in the opposite direction, that a lower IQ score somehow determines a person's life trajectory. That's also false. IQ captures performance on a narrow set of structured cognitive tasks. It does not measure creativity, leadership, practical intelligence, artistic ability, emotional insight, or moral character. Many forms of human capability, including entrepreneurship, craftsmanship, and social influence, rely heavily on traits that IQ tests were never designed to measure. Then there's the mythology around famous geniuses. You'll often see claims that Albert Einstein had an IQ of 160 or 180. The truth is that Einstein never took a modern IQ test. Those numbers are retrospective estimates, essentially educated guesses made decades later. They make for good headlines, but scientifically they're speculative. And finally, there's an important concept known as diminishing returns. As IQ increases, its predictive power for real-world outcomes tends to flatten. The difference between an IQ of 90 and 110 can meaningfully affect academic performance, but the difference between 135 and 145 is far less predictive of who will ultimately succeed. Above a certain threshold, often estimated around an IQ of 120 to 130, cognitive ability is rarely the limiting factor. At that point, the differentiators tend to be motivation, emotional regulation, social skills, curiosity, and perseverance. So the key takeaway is this: IQ can tell us something about how efficiently someone processes information and solves structured problems, but it does not determine destiny. Human potential is far broader than a single number. And that's today's Big Sip. The lighter roast is next. If you have kids on spring break this week, you might be asking yourself a familiar question. What exactly are we supposed to do with them all day? For about 9 months of the year, the schedule is structured: school, activities, homework, bedtime. Then spring break arrives, and suddenly the calendar is wide open and the energy level is not. The good news is kids don't actually need elaborate plans every day. What they usually need is novelty, something just different enough from the normal routine. That might be a beach morning, a bike ride through the neighborhood, a backyard water balloon battle, or letting them help cook something they normally wouldn't be trusted with. One strategy that works surprisingly well is the two-thing day. One activity that gets them moving: swimming, park, mini golf, anything physical, and one quieter activity later: a movie, building something, reading together, or even just drawing. Because what kids remember most from breaks like this usually isn't the big expensive outing. It's the small moments that feel different from ordinary life. And for parents, the real goal of spring break might simply be this: keep them busy enough that by bedtime, everyone is still speaking to each other. The lighter roast is next. Today, March 16th, offers a moment to reflect on several events that reveal both the heights of human innovation and the difficult lessons of history. First, on this day in 1945, the world lost Robert H. Goddard, widely regarded as the father of modern rocketry. Nearly 2 decades earlier, in 1926, Goddard launched the first liquid-fueled rocket from a snowy field in Massachusetts. The rocket rose only about 40 feet and flew for just a couple of seconds, but it proved something revolutionary: that controlled rockets powered by liquid fuel were possible. At the time, many people mocked the idea that rockets could ever travel through space. Yet the propulsion and guidance concepts Goddard developed ultimately became the foundation for modern space exploration. March 16th is also remembered for a landmark moment in spaceflight. In 1966, NASA's Gemini 8 mission achieved the first successful docking of 2 spacecraft in orbit. Astronauts Neil Armstrong and David Scott connected their Gemini capsule to an Agena target vehicle, a maneuver that would later become essential for missions to the moon. Shortly after docking, however, the spacecraft began spinning dangerously due to a malfunctioning thruster. Armstrong managed to regain control using the re-entry system, ending the mission early but demonstrating the calm precision that would later define his role in the Apollo program. And finally, March 16th also marks one of the darkest chapters of the Vietnam War. In 1968, US soldiers entered the village of My Lai in South Vietnam. Over the course of several hours, hundreds of unarmed civilians were killed in what became known as the My Lai Massacre. When the event became public the following year, it shocked the world and intensified debate about the war and the responsibilities of military leadership. Taken together, March 16th reminds us that history is rarely simple. It carries stories of discovery and courage, but also moments that force societies to confront difficult truths. Today's show moved from the science of sleep to the spectacle of cinema, and from the myths surrounding intelligence to the small realities of parenting during spring break. We also pause to remember that March 16th holds both remarkable achievements, like the early foundations of space exploration, and sobering lessons from history. And that's often the pattern of the world itself: progress, reflection, and the everyday moments that keep life moving forward. This is Dr. Robinson for the Brief Wake Up. Stay calm, kind, and curious. Catch you next time.